Honorable Foreign Minister of Australia, Madam Julie Bishop, Excellency High Commissioner of Australia, Mr. Patrick Suckling, Ambassador Rich Verma, High Commissioner Designate Navdeep, senior dignitaries from the Australian and Indian governments, Excellencies, friends, colleagues, and the online audience just joining us. I would like to welcome you all to this first Indo-Pacific Oration. As you all know, this is ORF's 25th year. We are celebrating 25 years of this institution. And given the significance of the Indo-Pacific and its importance to both our countries, what better way than to begin this inaugural oration, this series, with your lecture, madam. The theater of the Indo-Pacific is today home to the aspirations of over half the population of the world. The emerging powers which are embracing its shorelines are destined to be sea powers. They're setting out to embrace the oceans in ways that perhaps they've never done before in their long histories. And this embrace is something which is bound to perhaps witness contests, but it is also going to witness lots of conciliation, lots of coalitions. In the new world, this theater of the Indo-Pacific, I believe, is not necessarily going to be only about conflict. More significantly, it is one region that is foment and encourage new partnerships, new coalitions, and partnerships such as ours that will work together to ensure sustainable growth accompanied by peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. ORF, madam, itself has been involved in this region for some time now. It is not that just here, this year, our annual publication, which is called The Primer, which highlights 10 major issues which the world faces during the year, also highlights this region as one of the 10 key areas which will assume importance. Beyond that, following the initial years when ORF began its journey as a think tank, we first of all opened a chapter in Chennai to look at maritime and Indian Ocean affairs. This seemed a natural corollary of the kind of work we were doing. And it wasn't long before we realized that this region is a region that could not be dealt with in parts. So we engaged in the region in ways that have suited us the most. We have worked to create platforms for conversations between organizations, to create forums which work for the region, both at the official and the track 2 levels. And many of these have gradually transmuted into partnerships for writing and research, underlining and shaping the emerging discourse of the Indo-Pacific. Whether it be Raja Mohan's opus, the Samudra Manthan, or our forthcoming publication, India's Naval Strategy and Asian Security, being published by Routledge. That is being done with the Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Singapore. ORF is an organization that has been constantly engaged with the security and strategic aspects of these common waters. In recent years, as the region has emerged at the center of Asian geopolitics, shaped by rapidly changing power dynamics, we have seen a number of governments and institutions come forth to partner with us. The priority of this region has already been reflected in Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Indian Ocean tour to Sri Lanka, Seychelles, and Mauritius, during which he has squarely addressed some of these issues. Already, the US-India Joint Strategic Vision for the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean region signals New Delhi's new willingness to take on a more explicit leadership role in the region in partnership with like-minded countries. The vision also highlights the need for multilateral engagements amongst powers in the region to stabilize the emerging security architecture. And last year, the Observer Research Foundation, in partnership with the Ministry of External Affairs, hosted the first Indian Ocean Dialogue in September. And befittingly enough, this was held in Cochin, the port city, with a rich history and tradition of trade over these same Asian waters. The dialogue was attended by over 70 officials and representatives from 24 member states, dialogue partners, observers of the Indian Ocean Rim Association, and the outcome of the dialogue became the Kochi Consensus 2014. Now, the deliberations of this dialogue and a second Indo-Pacific conference hosted by us in November are under publication as a journal titled Asia's Waters. And this year, Madam Minister, we will be hosting the second edition of the same dialogue with a partner in Australia, with the Australian government. So we're looking forward to bringing together with our Australian partners in the same kind of formats, policymakers and thinkers, people of action and people of words, together upon the same platform. Madam Minister, it is our belief that given the background of the work done by our scholars, creating these platforms for regional leaders to articulate their vision with a larger community of thinkers in Delhi and across the world would be the most logical step, and therefore the series of lectures called the Indo-Pacific Oration. We're delighted that you, as the Foreign Minister, are one of the most important stakeholders in the region and a key partner to India, have agreed to deliver this inaugural address that is keenly awaited by this entire audience and lots of people waiting to listen to you online. And now, Madam, the floor is yours.
I'm delighted to be here in New Delhi to present the inaugural Indo-Pacific Oration at the Observer Research Foundation. And I acknowledge the Australian High Commissioner, the Indian High Commissioner Designate, the US Ambassador, Friends of Australia, Friends of India. ORF has, I believe, carved out an impressive record as India's leading strategic policy think tank. And the establishment of this oration represents another high point in what has been an extraordinary year for the relationship between our two countries. Last September, you welcomed Prime Minister Tony Abbott to India. Australia was honoured last November to host the first state visit of an Indian Prime Minister in almost 3 decades. I think it's fair enough to say that it was far too long between visits, but the warmth of the welcome that Prime Minister Modi received certainly made the wait worthwhile. Indeed, I was waiting to greet him at Canberra Airport on the evening of his appearance at a sports stadium full of Indian Australians in Sydney, and they just would not let him leave. And I waited and waited, but I saw on TV that he was receiving a welcome that you would expect for an international rock star rather than a politician. It was the personification of the impact Prime Minister Modi's leadership has had, not just here in India, but in Australia and other countries, who are ready to seize the opportunity to forge an even closer relationship with India. There's new excitement and new energy about India's future. That's clearly evident in the momentum that is driving our bilateral relationship. It's more dynamic, more diverse, broader and deeper than ever before. Indeed, unprecedentedly so. But it's also evident in our increasingly close cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region, the region in which both Australia's and India's core economic and strategic interests converge. For many decades, Australia's eyes had been firmly focused to our north and east. And this is part of our history. More than 70 years ago, the war in the Pacific brought home to Australia that the security of our nation must be found in our own region. In fact, it was in 1950, just 5 years after the end of World War II, that a predecessor Foreign Minister of Australia, Sir Percy Spender, said of Australia's place in the world, "Geographically, Australia is next door to Asia, and our destiny as a nation is irrevocably conditioned by what takes place in Asia. This means that our future depends to an ever-increasing degree upon the political stability of our Asian neighbours, upon the economic well-being of Asian people, and upon the development of understanding and friendly relations between Australia and Asia. Whilst it remains true that peace is indivisible and that what takes place in any part of the world may affect us, our vital interests are closer to home. It is therefore in Asia and the Pacific that Australia should make its primary effort in the field of foreign relations." Well, over time, the term Asia-Pacific became the shorthand for that increasingly influential region. But 65, 70 years on, I find that this term, this language, sells short many of Australia's strategic and economic priorities. Indeed, Australia is blessed to sit between two great oceans, each of which is vital to our future. Of course, we look east across the Pacific to the island states of our own neighbourhood and to our friend and ally, the United States. And for decades, we've looked north as our economic and increasingly our security partnerships with nations including Indonesia, Japan, China and South Korea have flourished. But I think until quite recently, Australia has not spent enough time looking west, across the vast Indian Ocean that happens to border my own electorate in Perth. I'm very proud of the fact that my western boundary is indeed the Indian Ocean. The focus on the West is not only recognising our geographic location, it represents a state of mind. The increasingly dynamic Indian Ocean region is vital to Australia's future economic and strategic security. In fact, around half of Australia's naval fleet is located along our Indian Ocean coastline. Our most elite soldiers, the Special Air Service, have been headquartered on the Indian Ocean since the regiment's inception in 1957. Indeed, they are also located in my electorate. A century ago, it was from the port of Albany on Australia's west coast that our soldiers set out for the Battle of Gallipoli, a battle that began on the 25th of April 1915, and one in which Australian and New Zealand soldiers fought and too often died alongside Indian soldiers. Next week we commemorate 100 years since the Gallipoli landings, and I think one of the significant and more poignant and touching elements of the recent reciprocal visits of our Prime Ministers was their public recognition and honouring of the links between our two militaries going back to the First World War. Our shared history brought us together in the past, and it will build our shared future. In more recent times, the ports of Australia's Indian Ocean coast have been the lifeblood of our economy as we've exported billions and billions of tonnes of iron ore, which have helped build and modernise Asia's cities. But despite this, for too long, the Indian Ocean aspect of our economic and security story has been underdone. I believe that thinking of our region as the Indo-Pacific better reflects the reality of Australia's international outlook, both to the world and to Australians themselves. Importantly, it also recognises that India is not at the periphery, but indeed at the very heart of our strategic outlook. During his address to the Australian Parliament in November last year, Prime Minister Modi spoke of the Asia-Pacific and Indian Ocean region, describing it as a dynamic region holding the key to this world's future. Clearly, Australia and India share a common view on the importance of the Indo-Pacific region. The reasons are clear. we are living through an historic shift of strategic and economic gravity to the Indo-Pacific region. India's emergence as a major power is a significant part of this story. Major trade, investment and energy flows are binding the great Indian and Pacific Oceans and their nation-states into a new strategic arc where the prosperity and stability of one will be indivisible from the other. Half the world's container ships, a third of bulk cargo traffic and 2/3 of oil ships pass through the Indian Ocean. Much of this across the top of the Indian Ocean from the Middle East through the Malacca Straits and the South China Sea to the major markets of North Asia. This traffic is only likely to grow as India, China, Indonesia, Vietnam and other countries in the region grow. And the Indian Ocean Rim itself is home to nearly 1/3 of the world's population, some 2 billion people, and takes in some of the globe's fastest growing economies and huge reserves of natural resources. So today it makes sense for us to think of the Indo-Pacific. It connects the two great oceans and rightfully recognises India as a key player in Asia's strategic mix. It underlines the crucial role that the maritime environment will play in our future strategic and defence planning. It also recognises that India will become a far more important player in East Asia, as Prime Minister Modi has made quite clear with his shift from India's Look East policy to an Act East policy. The great challenge of the Indo-Pacific era isn't the rise of any one power, however. It's the way in which, for the first time in centuries, we manage a region which is home to many powers. The recent significant United States-India joint strategic vision for the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean region is, I think, an excellent encapsulation of this point. It's a recognition of how the powers of the Indo-Pacific must work together to promote peace, prosperity and stability. It's consistent with the way in which Australia engages India, supporting regional economic integration, safeguarding security, promoting shared values, strengthening regional architecture, particularly the East Asia Summit, and bolstering ties between regional powers for regional benefit. In this era, as the economic and strategic importance of the Indo-Pacific grows, there's clearly an increasingly prominent role for India to play. I believe India is rising to this challenge and taking its rightful position as a world leader, as a superpower. Economic challenges like the balance of payments crisis of the early 1990s brought home to India the fact that it could not reach its full potential without integrating into the global economy. And by expanding its economy, India has already delivered extraordinary gains for its people. In the past 2 decades, both China and India's combined share of the global economy has increased more than 5 times over. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty. It's expected that in just 15 years' time, Asia's middle class will comprise more than 3 billion people. It's logical that India would look at nations like China and others in the region as examples of how trade, infrastructure and manufacturing can fuel nation-changing economic growth. As we've witnessed with China, it makes sense that India's strategic weight will grow as its economy grows and that India will now take on a more ambitious international role. Former Prime Minister Singh contributed to fresh thinking in India about its place in the region and the world. Prime Minister Modi has carried this momentum forward and is carving a role for India as a mature, strategic contributor in our region and beyond. We must, all of us who live in this region, be strong, engaged contributors, playing a role in creating a better future for our people and looking at new, mutually beneficial ways of working together. A changing India undoubtedly means a changing region, and it's a change that Australia welcomes. It also explains why we're working with a shared vision to bolster wider Indo-Pacific regional cooperation, particularly through the Indian Ocean Rim Association, IORA. For too long, we've spoken of IORA's potential, always unfulfilled. Established 20 years ago, it's only in the past few years, under the leadership of first India and now Australia, and hopefully next Indonesia, that IORA has begun to assume status as a serious regional grouping. Later this year, Indonesia will take over the chair, followed by South Africa in 2017, and that will mean 4 G20 countries consecutively in the chair. Now, this must help IORA build momentum as an effective regional organisation. Last year, as part of the Indian Ocean Rim Association's activities, ORF hosted the inaugural Indian Ocean Dialogue. This event was so successful that, yes, Australia will host the second dialogue in September of this year, with a focus on maritime security and transnational crime, and we hope that ORF will again be centrally involved, and we thank you for that support. Our maritime interests are at the forefront of IORA's contemporary agenda, and our cooperation on what is called the blue economy provides an example. The blue economy encompasses the economic activity associated with our oceans, not our land mass, our ocean mass. Everything from shipping to deep-sea fishing, energy production, coastal tourism. I thought Prime Minister Modi put it in a rather evocative way when he said recently that he considers the blue chakra in India's national flag as a symbol of blue revolution, just as saffron represents an energy revolution, white, the milk revolution, and green, the agricultural revolution. Well, as you can see from our flag, we have oceans of blue on it, signifying our status as an island continent. But utilising the blue economy is central to economic growth and job creation in all IORA member states. However, utilising the ocean's resources needs to be done sustainably. It requires scientific research and innovation, and they both happen to be among Australia and India's strengths. Our scientific bodies, such as our premier scientific research body, the CSIRO, and the Australian Institute of Marine Science and India's National Institute of Oceanography, headquartered in Goa, are at the forefront of scientific research into oceans, and we're working to commercialise the discoveries produced by this research and make them available across the region. This process is accelerated by innovative research partnerships and the sharing of knowledge. IORA also provides a platform for working together against threats of transnational crime, including terrorism and piracy. Recent experiences in the Indian Ocean have shown that concerted international cooperation is vital and can be successful. As a result of collective action, piracy off the Horn of Africa no longer poses the major threat to the region that it did several years ago. However, we must remain vigilant. Ongoing naval operations, including through the combined maritime forces, will remain crucial to maintaining regional maritime security in the short to medium term. IORA also provides a mechanism for combating other transnational crimes such as drug smuggling and people trafficking, crimes that have a deep impact on our communities. Thanks to that cooperation, we're now intercepting far more heroin from Afghanistan than we have in the past. That's why we're looking to establish through IORA a maritime crime forum with support from the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. This forum will promote intelligence sharing and capacity building across the Indian Ocean in recognition of the fact that crime is transnational. It disregards national or even sub-regional boundaries. We are fortunate that the Indian Ocean waters we share remain largely free of the kinds of territorial disputes that we've seen on the other side of the Malacca Straits. IORA can and should act as a safeguard against such disputes arising, as can our cooperation through the region's premier security forum, the East Asia Summit. So IORA is an important part of the regional framework through which habits of cooperation, consultation and negotiation are built in order to help ensure the continuing peace of the region and the prosperity that peace enables. That's why our cooperation really matters, and it's why we welcome the emphasis that Prime Minister Modi has placed on strengthening cooperation through IORA during his very successful recent visit to countries of the Indian Ocean. The past year has been an exciting one for India and Australia at the bilateral level. in the second decade of the 21st century, our interests are converging in a way they haven't always done before. We both want a vibrant, inclusive region that's engaged with the world. We both welcome regional institutions that help manage tensions. We both see the United States as a friend and partner, although our respective relationships are quite different with the United States. We each want a constructive, mutually advantageous relationship with China. We share a commitment to democracy, respect for the rule of law and global norms, an independent judiciary and the individual liberty of our citizens. We embrace freedom. These values underpin our approach to regional and global engagement. Together, we have more to offer our region than we do separately. In Australia, during his visit, Prime Minister Modi said, "India's development, demography and demand provide a unique long-term opportunity for Australia, and all in the familiar framework of democracy. There is no other example of this nature in the world." He's right. There are unique opportunities for our nations to cooperate and collaborate to improve the quality of life of the Indian people and the Australian people. As India develops, its need for secure sources of energy is growing. Australia can help provide that security. Indeed, we want to be the partner of choice for India's energy security: coal, gas, uranium. We've signed a nuclear cooperation agreement last September, and we're negotiating the administrative arrangements so that we can supply uranium to India. The new framework for security cooperation, which we agreed with the Indian government last November, is also a big step forward in our partnership. This framework sets an ambitious agenda for us to enhance our cooperation across a broad range of areas, including maritime security and cyber policy. The best testament of our strength in security cooperation will be practical, although meetings and discussions are always important too. The transformation over the past decade of India's Navy gives it greater capability to work in concert with the navies of its neighbours, including Australia. Not only has the Indian Navy joined the biannual RIMPAC exercises, but later this year, Australia and India are holding our first bilateral maritime exercises. India's leading role on regional maritime issues is evidenced by its far-sighted decision back in 2008 to establish the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. And this symposium, along with IORA, is crucial to building the underdeveloped regional architecture we need to achieve a truly collaborative approach to maritime security in the Indo-Pacific. And Australia shares this objective with India. We hosted the symposium last year, and the Australian Chief of Navy has assumed its chairmanship until 2016. This kind of engagement is a precursor to an even closer security relationship in the years ahead. In many ways, I see the relationship Australia shares with India following the path pioneered by our post-war relationship with Japan. Often, it's the economic relationship between countries that sets the foundation for a closer and broader strategic relationship, and that's certainly what happened with Australia and Japan, a nation that is now a very close friend of us both. And I marvel at the fact that in 1957, barely more than a decade after the horrors of the Second World War, Australia and Japan signed a landmark commerce agreement that paved the way for our modern trade investment relationship. By the 1970s, and for much of the next 40 years, Japan was our biggest trading partner. And as our relationship matured, it also expanded to defence and security cooperation, both bilaterally and through regional forums, and working together with shared partners, including the United States. The people-to-people links deepened enormously. India is now Australia's 7th largest export market, and our economic ties are growing rapidly. Earlier this year, my colleague, the Minister for Trade and Investment, Andrew Robb, led Australia's largest ever business delegation to India. About 450 senior business representatives from Australia were in that delegation. I think in the past, Australian investors have seen some difficult challenges, and it's a fact that some investors left the Indian market. But India's recent move to liberalise its foreign investment caps in some sectors, such as insurance, is being very warmly welcomed. As Prime Minister Modi's economic reforms progress, the climate for investors will continue to improve. Some very progressive and competitive Indian state governments are also helping to create a more positive investment climate for Australian businesses. And we are more than happy to reciprocate. We are open for business. We are particularly open for Indian investment in Australia, and we welcome it. Recent major Indian investments in Australian resources sector are a testament to that. The returns will be even greater if we can finalise a free trade agreement, the Australia-India Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, which is a key priority for Australia's engagement with India in 2015. CECA, as it's called, has the capacity to unleash new potential for economic cooperation and integration. After Australia's success in concluding negotiations with Japan, South Korea and China last year, we have 3 free trade agreements with those countries. Australia is engaged and ready to complete the Asian Quartet. We want a free trade agreement with India, a commercially meaningful agreement that will help propel both our economies forward and enable our people to realise their full potential. More job opportunities, more opportunity to trade goods and services. The Australia-India relationship of the future can certainly be much bigger and broader than just one based on our shared inheritances. The Westminster system of government has served us both well, and I certainly won't deny that we both share a passion for cricket, and I'm pleased that if India had to hand over the World Cup to anyone, then it was to us. But what we can achieve together in the years ahead will go beyond the cricket field, systems of government, or the English language. It will be about building trust, gaining understanding and increasing the bonds between our people. As Prime Minister Modi said when he addressed the Australian partnership, new pathways to prosperity do not come from travelling down the roads of the previous century. India is travelling a new road at the beginning of the 21st century. It's a road filled with opportunity, with some heady expectations and, of course, with some risk and complexity. We must continue to work together to drive economic growth and opportunity and to address the strategic challenges that our region faces. There will always be competition alongside our cooperation. That's only natural in a world of nation states. But I'm an optimist, and it's how we manage that competition that will determine our future. It's up to us, the nations of the Indo-Pacific, to determine what the 21st century, the so-called Asian century, will look like. In Australia, India has a trusted partner and a close friend. I have every faith that we will walk this road together into a bright future with a deep and enduring relationship. We are natural partners, we are natural friends. Thank you.
We'll now move to the moderated Q&A. We have identified 3 individuals. Can I first request Professor Alka Acharya to pose the question? You can briefly introduce yourself and then ask the Minister. The mic would be available. There it is.
Thank you, Minister. My name is Alka Acharya, and I head an independent Institute of Chinese Studies in Delhi at the moment. Thank you very much. I must say that one was very elevated and feeling very optimistic listening to the great promises that you have outlined that are in store. It's also quite clear that came out very well that the old order is changing. And what we are really seeing is the unraveling of an order that had been dominated by the Euro-American group in the Asia-Pacific. And this order is being unraveled with the rise not only of the smaller economies, but definitely the rise of China. Clearly, on the one hand, it is opening up new opportunities, and yet this rise has potentially brought about a great dissension within the Western capitalist world. And we have the recent AIIB responses from the rest of the world to that to see what kind of a challenge this is, that how does the Western capitalist world, which had dominated the Asia-Pacific, and now respond. A Filipino scholar had remarked when the Asia-Pacific imagination had been unfurled that this was a concept which had been fathered, but whose putative parents were Japan and America, and the midwife of which had been Australia. Now we are looking at the Indo-Pacific, yet another imaginary. What role is Australia going to play in this? Thank you.
First, I don't see it as an unravelling of the order that we have seen for the last 70 years since the Second World War. I see it as transforming, but in a positive way. Unravelling connotes something rather more negative. And I think that the United States pivot or rebalance to the Asia-Pacific is most welcome in this region. I see and hear, as I travel around the Indian Ocean, Asia-Pacific, a desire for more United States leadership in the region, not less. And so it is changing because China is re-emerging as a world power. India is emerging as a significant economic power, and it is a democracy, as Prime Minister Modi said. It's an unusual characterisation in that regard. But what we must do is manage the emergence, re-emergence and existence of the United States as the world's only superpower in a way that benefits us all. I think it's worth noting that about 120 countries around the world count China as its largest trading partner. 120 countries. Many nations have an interest in seeing China engage globally as a responsible international player. And I believe that that's how the United States sees it as well, that it's not about containing or excluding, it's about accommodating, about cooperating, and about working in the interests of all our nations. There's no denying that the United States has provided the peace and prosperity in our region, or the framework of the United States security umbrella has provided the peace and prosperity that we have enjoyed. But I think there's far too much for other nations to lose to allow the competitive spirit of emerging and re-emerging powers to end in conflict. Australia plays a role as a friend to the United States. Indeed, apart from New Zealand, the United States is our only alliance, formal alliance partner with the ANZUS Treaty. China has been for the last few years our largest trading partner and will no doubt continue to be so, while China's economy and China's demand for energy and iron ore continues to grow. But what we're focusing on today is the Australia-India relationship. And I think we are uniquely positioned, exquisitely positioned geographically and perhaps philosophically to be a useful partner for India as it emerges on the world stage. We have been a trusted ally of the United States. We are a reliable partner for China's economic growth, and we intend to be a very close friend and strategic and economic partner for India. And as I said, I'd like us to be the partner of choice for India's energy security. Australia is often described as a middle power. I think that sells us short. I see us as a top 20 country in every indicator that counts, economic, social, apart from population. We are in the top 20. So as a country that has some weight in the region, we intend to be a positive force for good, to achieve the stability, prosperity and security that this region is capable of achieving.
Can I request Professor Ravni Thakur to pose the next question, please?
Good afternoon, ma'am, and thank you very much for an extremely enlightening and stimulating talk on the Indo-Australia relationship. My question, like my predecessors, ma'am, has a little bit to do with China. China's latest foreign policy emphasis has been on what it calls the maritime Silk Route. I wonder, ma'am, whether you'd like to say a few words on how you think that is going to impact Indo-Australia relationship. Thank you.
I've not yet met with Foreign Minister Swaraj, but we are holding a rather long meeting tomorrow, and I'm very much looking forward to discussing some of the regional and geostrategic issues, and I'm sure that we will discuss China's foreign policy, which is more assertive than we've seen in the past, but also commensurate with its increasing economic clout regionally and globally. From my previous discussions with your Foreign Minister, I think we have a very similar view on China's territorial ambitions. We don't take a position on territorial claims, but we do urge all nations to respect international law, to respect global norms, and to resolve any territorial or maritime claims peacefully. There is far too much at stake for this to not occur. I was heartened by the recent meeting last November between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Abe, which, whilst it was not the warmest meeting I've seen, it was certainly a positive sign that both nations understand what is at stake. We need to ensure that tensions in the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands are de-escalated. Our biggest fear is that it would be through some random act rather than through some more concerted effort that could enable a conflict to occur. So there has to be a de-escalation of tensions, that both nations abide by the international norms. In the South China Sea, we very much support what the ASEAN countries are doing. As one voice, they are seeking to conclude a code of conduct with China, which will govern the maritime negotiations. And I think if the ASEAN way of operating as one is allowed to continue, then the status quo will no doubt remain. I can't see too many of these maritime boundaries disputes actually being resolved in the short term, but at least if there's a framework in place, we can be assured that freedom of navigation, freedom of the seas, and the passageway, which is so important for Australia and other nations of this region, is unimpeded. I think that in recent times there has been more of a recognition of that by China, and in recent meetings that I've attended there has been a willingness to support this code of conduct process between ASEAN and China. What India and Australia must do as members of the East Asia Summit is to continue to promote that position. And I think if we work together in this regard, we'll have more influence than if we worked separately, if I could put it that way.
We have time for one last question, a brief one by Ajay Shukla. The mic is behind you, Ajay.
Madam Foreign Minister, my name is Ajay Shukla. I write for a newspaper called Business Standard on strategic affairs. My question to you relates to the evolution of Australian foreign policy. Over the last decade, a little more than a decade, we've seen a series of changes in the way that you see your neighborhood, the way you see China particularly, and by extension that affects India as well. Now I presume this is not just pure strategy, that there are domestic strands to all of this within Australia. Could you just talk us through some of those domestic strands that shape Australian foreign policy that will help us to predict and to sort of assess what is happening?
One of the aims of a foreign minister is to make foreign policy less foreign, so that the positions we take on the world stage are understood at home. As I indicated earlier, our relationship with Japan at a very early stage after the Second World War became grounded in our economic interests. And it was through that relationship, the economic relationship, that we became such close friends. Of course, they were our major trading partner for 40 years or more, but it was through that economic trade investment framework that Australia and Japan came to understand each other and form a deep and enduring friendship. And I believe that we will have a similar relationship with India, not that the beginnings resemble the beginning of our relationship with Japan. And of course, Australia and India have been friends, cricket competitors, members of the Commonwealth for decades. So we have a very different history. But nevertheless, our economic relationship provides us with the opportunity to deepen even more the connection between our two countries. Not to say it's not significant already. There are 450,000 people in Australia who claim Indian heritage. We have a significant exchange of students. In fact, this year we're commencing our new Colombo Plan initiative in India. 350 Australian students will be studying in Indian universities and bringing back new perspectives and insights into India back to Australia. In the case of China, too, our relationship has been very much built on an economic framework. But over time, that has broadened and deepened, and we're seeing a greater connection between Australia and China. The difference is, of course, China has a very different system of government, a very different model. We're much more familiar with the India framework of democracy, rule of law, the Westminster system. You know, we understand each other's system of government far more readily. But that's not to say we can't have a comprehensive relationship with China. We do. So our foreign policy is always pragmatic. It's always practical. I hope it's coherent and it reflects the reality of who we are and where we are. My job as Foreign Minister is to protect our reputation as an open, liberal democracy, committed to democratic institutions, the rule of law, human rights, and an open, export-oriented market economy about to enter its 24th consecutive year of economic growth. I mean, that's who we are as a nation. And what we do in our foreign policy should be seen through the prism of our values and our economic strength.
Thank you, Madam Minister. So I have now the unique privilege to propose a vote of thanks. Madam Minister, thank you for the most eloquent and expansive exposition on the region and indeed on the bilateral partnership and the promises of that. You have indeed, in your oration, provided many of us direction and ideas that must be pursued at various levels and by various actors. It would be impossible to capture the richness of your oration, but let me just try and list three of them that I take away with me. The first, I think, was the lesson of Australia from history, the intrinsic linkage between national security and regional security, and how as nations become more engaged and grow domestically, they will have to devote commensurate resources in engaging with the region, in regional partnerships, and indeed in regional institutions. The second takeaway for me, ma'am, is the concurrent rise of so many powers in the same region, in a small geography. And indeed, that again brings us to the first point on why institutions and frameworks are important. You mentioned the East Asia Summit and the Indian Ocean Rim Association, but I'm sure many other coalitions and unilateral arrangements will need to be devised to manage this dynamic geography. Finally, as two democracies who are committed to freedom of navigation, of democracy, of human rights, India and Australia, in many of these multiple forums, must become partners in shaping norms and codes that define good behavior, that encourage others to follow those norms and codes, and take leadership in shaping a peaceful and prosperous Indian Ocean and Indo-Pacific geography. Thank you, Madam, and can I request you all to join me in applauding the Minister for a remarkable oration.